Good morning. Welcome, everyone. I am Ryan Dorsey, representative for the 3rd City Council District and chair of the Land Use and Transportation Committee. This morning we'll be conducting a meeting of the committee that is, I would say, general and orientation in nature. I first just want to welcome everybody here. Thank everybody for being here. In attendance to my right, we have City Council President Zeke Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We have members of the committee, my vice chair and our vice president of the City Council, Sharon Green Middleton from the 6th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
From the 9th District, Councilman John Bullock. From the 1st District, Councilmember Mark Parker. We have from the 10th District, Councilwoman Felicia Porter.
Thank you so much, Mr.
Whose
Chair.
birthday it is today. Alice is going to sing solo. And from the 11th District, Councilman Zach Blanchard.
Mr. Chair, please note that my birthday was yesterday.
Noted. I don't know where Paris is. We do have one other member of the committee who's not with us yet today, Paris Gray from the 8th District. Before I kind of get into anything here, I'm going to acknowledge some other folks here. I want to turn the microphone over to our council president, who I'm very thankful to have sitting here with me today at this introductory meeting. Would you like to say anything, Mr. President?
Keep it very, very brief. I just want to thank the chair for pulling us together, conducting this consistent series of oversight hearings. Very much looking forward to the collaboration with the administration, with the different agencies, and with some of our new and returning colleagues. Appreciate your leadership in developing this series and backwards mapping it and just making sure we are working together as one Baltimore. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. Look, I'm doing this for the first time, folks. So I'm, getting my sea legs here. I want to acknowledge also our staff to the committee, Mr. Tony Leva. We also have the chief of the Department of Council Services. Did I get that right? Interim Director of the Department of Council Services, Nancy Mead here, who is not new to City Hall, having worked in the staff of the council, the 11th Council District previous term. We also have various other members, staff from agencies, the mayor's office. We have Tyler Schnilla from the mayor's office of government relations. We have Alice Kennedy, our housing commissioner. Hello, Alice, good morning. We have Becky Witt, the executive director of the Board of Municipal and Zoning Appeals. Did I get that? I got that right. We have Michelle Toth from the law department. We have Eric Tiso from the land use division of the planning department. And we have, my brain is not working. What's his name? What's your name? I'm sorry.
Luciano Diaz, policy analyst for DOT. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Kimberly Rubens from the housing department, and we have our new acting DOT director, Veronica Macbeth. So happy that your pipes have not burst, have they? No, you got a plumber. Okay, great. Sorry, Luciano. Thank you. We also have some other guests. We are now being joined by a member of the committee, Paris Gray from the 8th Council District. Today, we have a simple agenda that I just want to cover kind of as a matter of orientation. First, we've done some introductions here. We have in a packet that's been distributed to members and that's on the desks here for agency staff, a couple of documents in it, a memo that relates to the general outline of how the committee is going to run over time and a rotation. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then there's a second memo regarding kind of rules of procedure for how the committee will be conducted. We'll go over both of them. We'll also hear Michelle Adam Levine was supposed to join us today. Do you know, have you seen Adam today?
I have not, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we're supposed to have Adam Levine from the Law Department here to talk a bit about the legal end of the stuff that we do as a quasi-judicial body. I think the first thing I want to say, before anything else, is that the reason I asked for our agency heads to be here today and to just have this simple convening today is that we could all just look one another in the eye. I think it's important here. I'm very eager and ambitious and enthusiastic and about the possibility of the term ahead. I feel that with 4 years in this term ahead, there's yet no time to spare, right? That there's so much work to be done and that we have so much potential and capability that in working together, we can achieve truly wonderful and transformative and important things for the present and future of the city of Baltimore. And I feel so privileged to have any part in that at all, and to know the people in this room, and to have this committee in whom I have such great confidence, and the partnership with our agency staff here and people throughout city government to execute on behalf of the citizens of Baltimore. And so my main goal, if nothing else here today, is to have us kind of look around this room and see one another face to face and just know that we are all here in a spirit of service and collaboration to achieve the absolute best that we can deliver. If we could take just like 1 minute, I don't want to be all woo-woo for this, in general, but like just take a second here and please just look around the room at the dedicated people with whom we share this space. Committee members, if we could take a look at the first memo about the committee schedule overview that's in your packets. I've spoken with the members of this committee and representatives from the mayor's office and the council president's office. I haven't had a chance necessarily to speak with all the different folks from agencies that I want to, but generally about how I would like to utilize this committee's time to best outcome. Council President Cohen and I have both spoken extensively about the importance of oversight and as well as the importance of partnership. And, if folks know me for anything, it's that I've taken a keen eye to transportation matters and really invested a lot in understanding how the transportation department works and how I think we can achieve better outcomes. And so for the purpose of the committee's cycle, kind of on a monthly basis, there's a lot of work that I think we have heard needs to be done, or a lot of concern from a lot of committee members, council members, and members of the public about various aspects of the Department of Transportation operations. And so we want to be able to hold oversight and thoughtful discourse on the first week of every month will be dedicated to matters of the Department of Transportation. And I'm trying, I'm here to lay out an agenda of those well enough in advance that nobody feels like we're trying to spring anything on anybody, that we're here working like in transparency and partnership. I've also made a commitment with the mayor's office, council president's office, and the agencies that for any oversight hearing that we're conducting, that we're going to have kind of private prep meetings a couple weeks in advance of that, so that we can all be kind of working in partnership all the way up to the hearing, preparing together, understanding one another, where we're coming from, what we bring into, and what we expect to bring or have brought to the hearings, so that we're not here trying to, like, shock anybody or anything in public. We're not, this is truly about partnership. I was chatting with Nancy before the hearing. She asked, "Are you a gavel kind of guy?" And I said, I'm more like a pound the table kind of guy. And it reminded me of the lawyer's adage of, if the facts are against you, argue the law. If the law is against you, argue the facts. And if the facts and the law are against you, pound the table and yell like hell. I don't want this to be a place where we pound the table, right? And I want this to be a place where we understand the facts collectively, and where we understand the law collectively, so we understand the framework within which we're all just here to work. And so that we can have really constructive and productive discourse about a wide range of things. So for the first week of every month, we're gonna investigate and prod matters related to the Department of Transportation operations, and there's so many facets to that. On the second Thursday of each month, we're going to talk about things related to the housing department, the planning department, and that's a little less hashed out. We've obviously got an agenda here for parking enforcement, community engagement, lighting maintenance, traffic calming, quick build, other things, tech division, footways, right-of-way, street cuts, things like this for DOT. But haven't really laid out such a stringent agenda or ambitious agenda with related to that. But I think that that's also because we have some really interesting policy work that we're going to seek to undertake related to planning and housing stuff, related, I think, specifically to how we become a better city to work in from the private sector, how we become easier to work with through permitting and through land use standards. And that's going to take up a lot of the work that we do kind of in the third week of every month, which is where we're going to hear bills of policy and matters of like major planning and coordination. Now, there are a lot of things, there are a number of things that I've listed in this outline that are things that have been kind of lingering in public awareness or have been kind of discussed publicly in fits and spurts through many administrations over many years or even decades. But, in the short list of things that I've listed here, the Greenway Trails Network progress, the fact that we have a Charm City circulator and an MTA bus system, and we control the routes for one of them, and we have some overlap in the two, and there could be greater efficiency in them, so we maybe talk about that. Nancy and I were just talking before the meeting about one-way to two-way conversions. We've got all these streets in the middle of the city that at some point were converted from two-way to one-way streets for the expediency of cars, but there are perhaps detriments that came from that. And so maybe we should continue and like really dedicate some effort into like whether or not these should be converted back into two-way corridors. The future of the Jones Falls Expressway as a thing that, should it exist, does it need to exist? Does it need to exist in the way that it does or to the extent that it does? The build out of the bicycle network. The highway to nowhere, I think like in the forefront of a lot of people's minds in the city. What is the future there? How is the money that we have for this going to be spent? What are the outcomes that we're going to get? What's the long-term vision for that space? And then other things about like vehicle crash response that takes up a lot of people's time in this city, especially the police department. It takes up an inordinate amount of time, and how could we be doing this a little bit differently? These are just a few things. One other thing that I want to note is I've spent a considerable amount of time speaking with Eric Tiso over the years, and one of the things that I want to note that we're going to seek to undertake is some annual bills on updates to the zoning code to update various elements of the zoning code, as well as a comprehensive zoning map update, so that we can consider rezoning in ways that we have not been able to in the past. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get Adam Levine talking in a few minutes. And then for the fourth week of the month, for our private council folks here, a reliable docket where we're going to hear our place-based, site-specific land use bills on the fourth week of the month. So that, I think in years past, I have felt very tired and kind of burned out on hearing 2 bills one week and 2 bills the next week and 2 bills the week after that, and maybe having 1 week off in the course of a month from just coming in and hearing, 20 minutes of bills. I figure better if we could just organize that to all happen once a month, one docket each month, and then we can reserve these other weeks for these other kind of topics. That's the kind of general overview that I wanted to give on agenda and kind of scheduling. Are there any thoughts or comments or questions or anything from committee members related to that? Cool. I guess I want to just open up here to our agency heads, who I'm very thankful to have had take the time. We're just joined just in time by Chris Ryer, our planning department director. Everything that's been said, any thoughts from our agency heads, just spitballing?
I'll start. Good morning, Councilman Dorsey. Good morning, other members of the council, Council President Cohen, and Councilwoman Middleton. I am
Give us your name.
Huh?
Give us your name.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, hi. I'm Director Veronica Macbeth of the Baltimore City Department of Transportation, and I am 1 week and 4 days old in this position, so very excited to be here, coming from USDOT. So I'm excited about the opportunity for the Land Use and Transportation Committee. Looking forward to making some positive changes at DOT. I almost called you Ryan, but Councilman Dorsey and I go way back, as Councilman Cohen and I do, and Councilwoman Middleton, who is also my councilwoman in my district. So we have a lot of long history together, all from when Councilman Dorsey and also Council President Cohen were freshman council people. So I think we have really great long-running relationships. So I do look forward to working with you, and also Councilwoman Middleton, who I have gotten to work with over the course of the last 8 years living in my community as also the association president. So I think we have some really great opportunities to make some positive change at DOT and within the city. So I look forward to these opportunities.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just say, Director Macbeth, we are really excited for your leadership. We know you from when we've all worked together, but I just want to say on behalf of the City Council, we're just really excited for the breath of fresh air and energy that I think you're going to bring to the Department of Transportation. The challenges are significant. I would not underplay any of what the chair or other folks are going to share throughout these next couple of years, because it's real, but I think you have a real opportunity to show something different and show that Baltimore really can be a leader when it comes to street safety, when it comes to improving our infrastructure, when it comes to helping our children and our older adults and other folks access mobility, whether that means getting to school on time, getting to work on time, getting to the grocery store. I just think there is so much ground for us to cover together, and I will just say on behalf of this City Council that we're really excited for your leadership in this space, and I think that you're bringing both a federal perspective, a local perspective, and that I think is what this agency needs. So I don't want to get ahead of the council. I know there's a confirmation process to come, but very much looking forward to the partnership.
Thank you so much, and I concur.
I think we're doing good on time here. Maybe even a little ahead of schedule from what I had in mind. I don't want to take up more of our very in-demand agency heads' time than is necessary. If you got to go, we're not going to be offended if you got to go. The rest of this hearing meeting is going to be about kind of some of the legal aspects of hearing land use bills. This body functions both in a policymaking and oversight capacity, as well as a quasi-judicial capacity, where understanding the law is really important. And so we have representation from the law department here to talk about that. I've also invited some private representatives, private counsel, who commonly present their clients' matters to this body to share a little bit about their experience as well. So, Veronica, I know you went through a lot to get here today. I'm not trying to, here's your hat, what's the hurry, but yeah, if you gotta go, cool. So I wanna invite Adam Levine from the law department to give us some insights. Madam CEO, thank you for spending time here with us this morning. I don't even think I saw you there behind the podium. Thank you. If we're writing the zoning code and policy related to land use, if we're writing laws related to transportation, we are functioning as policymakers. And we have a lot of leeway. You know, we can legislate on anything that the state enables us to legislate on, or that the city charter allows us, the confines within which we have to work. But uniquely, this committee and the bills that are assigned to it commonly are something that we have to regard from a different perspective, not politically, not policy making, but quasi-judicial, and where we have to essentially make determinations based on the law and how it tells us we have to make determinations. Those bills generally come in three forms. Those are bills for conditional use, where the zoning code has determined that in order for an applicant to be able to get a permit to do something, they need to put forth a conditional use ordinance as opposed to a conditional use that can be heard by the zoning board. In cases where a conditional use is conditional by ordinance, also if a variance is required, those variances have to come to us as well. And then there are bills on rezoning. And there are a couple of basic frameworks of understanding for those who haven't really been oriented to these things. I want to just make sure folks really understand, and I'll give my very basic understanding, and then I'll turn this over to Adam, that essentially with conditional use matters, it's the easiest way to couch this is it's assumed that the use is allowable unless there's something unique about the specific location that makes it uniquely bad. And with variances, it's assumed that it's not allowable unless there's something unique about the specific location that makes it so that it should be given some unique privilege at that specific location. And so those two things are kind of like opposites in a certain way. And then there's rezoning. Rezoning can really only be done on the basis of two things on a case-by-case basis. An argument and facts must be found that that at the last time when the given property was rezoned in a comprehensive rezoning, a mistake was made, or that somehow some large-scale change has happened in the area prevailing around the location, such that it has left this one specific property out of step with the change that has occurred all around it. And these are commonly referred to as the mistake change or mistake or change standards for rezoning. And anything outside of those two standards on a case-by-case basis is not permissible by law. The only other thing that we can do is comprehensive rezoning, which is why, as I noted before, this will be something that we intend to do on an annual basis, being able to look the whole city over and identify those properties that for one reason or another may make sense to rezone them, but where mistake or change may not be the most appropriate argument to make as to why it should be rezoned. There are reasons we can rezone, more like having ambition as a city and having foresight about the kind of change that we think is necessary in order for the city to grow. And that might be a more common basis for rezoning properties on some grounds other than mistake or change. So I want to turn it over to Adam Levine to talk a little bit more about the confines within which we need to work in a quasi-judicial function, and then I'll invite our private counsel folks to share some of their experience.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Adam from the Law Department. Yeah. And I guess I'm just going to, I think, talk for a few minutes, just very kind of high level, you know, rather than, because it's going to get boring quick. And then, you know, some other people I think are going to speak on these things, and you all may have some questions as well. So first of all, I'll say, you know, recently I took a look at the city's first zoning code from 1931, or at least its first zoning code that was upheld. And it's this little thin book. And if you look at the zoning code today, I mean, it's hundreds of pages. It's very ambitious. It tries to do so many different things. Areas that are now part of zoning, I don't think would have been imagined in 1931 as areas of zoning. And so I guess just my first, you know, like observation is it's really complicated. It's really complex. There's, unfortunately, anytime you're drafting something really lengthy, there's ambiguities. Things don't always fit together perfectly. It's not easy to understand. So please, you know, because we don't even always understand it in the law department. We're trying to work our way through it sometimes. But please feel free to call us if you have any questions, you know, any thoughts on like what you might try to be doing, you know, desires you have or confusion over something. You know, we're always there to try to help. Okay, so the first thing I guess I'll just talk about is quasi-judicial versus legislative. Basically, quasi-judicial means that you are acting basically like the zoning board. You're acting in the same capacity as if you were the zoning board, even though you are a committee of the city council. And it relates to things, as Councilperson Dorsey said, are project specific. These are things relating to a single property or to a group of properties. They're applying for some permission to do something that they don't have by right. The zoning code contains a set of standards that regulate whether you can grant that or not grant it or how you grant it. And that is what quasi-judicial is. And that is distinguished from something legislative, which is most of what you do, you know, zoning or non-zoning. Legislative is policy-based type decision-making. And that's where you're dealing with something not on an individual basis, but it's a lot of different properties, and you're trying to regulate all of those properties on general grounds. It's going to include things like text amendments, and it's going to include comprehensive rezoning. It's going to include larger overlays, like you just passed the Harford Road overlay. I consider that a legislative type decision. And sometimes these things are gonna be both text amendments and comprehensive rezoning, which I think is the case for the Harford Road overlay, for instance. But that's where you're you are able to bring to bear the same kind of thought process that you have for everything else that comes before you. You talk with people, regular citizens, you get insights into things, you're thinking about it on a policy basis, going forward generally, and that's how you're making your decision. In the quasi-judicial context, you can only consider, it's a struggle to do it because, you're council people and people talk to you all the time, but you can only consider the evidence that's presented to you at the hearing. The exhibits, the testimony, those are the only things that you're supposed to consider. And there are sort of procedural elements to a quasi-judicial hearing. Cross-examination is permitted. If you have somebody who's applying for something, somebody who's against it, or a group of people, they ask to cross-examine the other side's witnesses, they have the right to do that. In addition, as opposed to a legislative type hearing, you have to consider giving people a fair chance to say their piece. For instance, if the applicant gets up and it's a complicated project and they go on for 15 minutes about it, you have to give the opposition, an equal amount of time approximately to rebut what the applicant is saying. So in a legislative hearing, you can really limit the testimony to a much greater extent. But I think my advice would be to be a little more flexible in a quasi-judicial hearing. And then I would say one size does not fit all in quasi-judicial hearings. You are going to have many matters where, there's not opposition, there's a consensus, everybody thinks it's going to be a good project. And for those kinds of hearings, I think it's fine to have a more abbreviated process. You don't have to be as careful about it. And this is just my view. There are other people who have other views. But I think you will get a sense probably very early on when you really have something controversial. Perhaps there's a lawyer who appears for the opponents. There are many people who are calling you. Many people sign up to testify against something. In those kinds of hearings, I think my advice would be to take a little bit more time. Make sure you understand everything. If you're confused about something, feel free to, sort of pause things until you understand it. To call the law department, to call the planning department, because I have had cases where, there is some confusion that happens, and then that confusion plays out in the courtroom, and if we missed something, the court is going to send it back. Nobody really likes that because it's just more time in dealing with the underlying project. Okay, just a few more things. As Councilperson Dorsey said, these are all going to fit within the quasi-judicial things are going to fit within different categories. It's probably going to be a conditional use, a variance, what's called a piecemeal rezoning, which is individual property rezoning. And then the last thing that's quasi-judicial is a PUD. Those are typically going to be the quasi-judicial type things that are going to come before you. It's important to make sure that you can identify and understand the standards in the zoning code that are applicable to each request. I just have a couple more things and then I'll open it up. My apologies for taking a little bit of time. It's important to understand the arguments that are being made by the parties, both for and against, because those are the things that, if it is challenged in court, the court is going to want to see that you addressed in some way. So if somebody raises an issue that you didn't expect, it's important to get into a little bit. You can feel free to ask questions. What do you mean by that? Law department, could you comment on that? Planning department, could you comment on that? Okay, and then once you identify the standards applicable, findings of fact, that is where you are going to be applying a particular standard relevant to that type of application. For instance, in the context of a conditional use, whether there's going to be some unusual adverse effect to the surrounding properties is one of the key considerations. And in applying that, you have to take the pieces of evidence that people are expressing to you or describing to you, and then figure out what you think is more persuasive. Maybe you think there is going to be an adverse effect because it's a terrible intersection, traffic's awful, this is too intense a use for that corner, and maybe it's a gas station, and I'm just taking an extreme example. They want 24 gas pumps at a really busy intersection. In that circumstance, you may think, we can't approve it. There's just too much of an adverse effect because they want so many gas pumps at a really busy intersection. So that's where you really get into the nitty-gritty and just taking the specifics of the application and applying the standard to those specifics. And then finally, the court is going to want to see that there are some written findings of fact. That's going to be important to the court if the matter is challenged, that in some form there's a written decision making findings of fact that apply the particular standards applicable to that request. And that's my little bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. You covered, I think, everything I was hoping you'd cover. One follow-up question on that writing of the finding of facts. Who writes those findings of facts? Our staff here, Tony. Tony, do you consult with the law department? I don't know.
Finding of facts are drafted by me. I send them to the council's legal aid, Aaron DeGraffeney.
Hold on, I'm going to give you the microphone.
Oh, sorry. I draft the findings, sir. I send them over to our legal counsel, Aaron DeGraffeney, who reviews them for legal sufficiency. And then those are sent over to DLR, which are included in our hearing agendas, our council meeting agendas, and then they are voted on by the entire council.
Thanks.
I would just say on that, I mean, there are different ways to do it. What many counties do is they assign that task to, I mean, we don't really have this, but they'll assign it to council, to that jurisdiction's, equivalent, quasi-judicial body. Council will draft a decision and then we'll bring it back and it'll be formally adopted by the body. That's now essentially how the zoning board operates.
It's fairly unusual that we have conditional by ordinance as a thing in our zoning code at all. It's like pretty unusual that the council has to find facts on these kind of zoning matters in the first place, I think, my experience. Yes, Councilwoman Porter.
Thank you so much. What if there's a discrepancy between the actual law and the law department? How do we reconcile that?
Can you unpack that just a little bit more?
Yeah, so if the law department has a particular opinion on something and I'll say wonderful lawyers that represent other entities have a differing opinion, how do we reconcile that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we give the law department and your own counsel, we all give you our best advice. Generally, we think we're right. I'm sure we do our best to be right. We're not always right. The law is not exactly like a math equation where there's, only one answer, or in some math equations, I guess there are a couple answers. Ultimately, it's up to you. There's some things I think that are like easier to kind of sift through than others. For instance, like there are certain kinds of notice that we have to give depending on the type of zoning legislation. That may be easier to not always, but that may be easier to work your way through. There are other questions that come up that, may reflect ambiguities in the zoning code. Sometimes these individual cases will reveal an ambiguity that like you may want to address in a broader way after you hear the individual case.
And so the only reason why I bring that up is because we had one instance, it was on Georgetown Road in Marl Park, where there was a discrepancy based on the line, the property line from the Department of Planning, based on the property line from her title company. And so it was a very challenging situation for the resident because ultimately her property line actually moved over. And so it was very emotional for her. But I just wanted to know like how that is reconciled and how we as council members can assist you all with kind of being that buffer to the community in those instances.
Well, like in that specific example that you give, that may be one of those situations where, you could say, all right, well, look, obviously this is a little unusual and a little complicated because we've got two sources of information that conflict. Maybe we ought to pause this and, we can have, because we have people in the law department who are very good with title issues. It could be, like in your specific example, maybe the subdivision is different than what is in the deed. I don't know.
And I also bring that up because most of us have community engagement processes in order for us to support any type of zoning change. And so it would be best to have some sort of standardized approach to that. Where do we go from here? But also to communicate with us, because if we are providing our influence, letter of support, et cetera, with community members for these respective zoning changes, I just want to make sure that all of us are working on the same sheet of music.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would just, feel free to call us. We're not making the policy decisions in the law department. I think we do we obviously have our own personal preferences, but I think we really make an effort to try to put those aside and to give you neutral advice. This is what you want to do. This is maybe, a way that you could do it. We would suggest you not do it this way because of this problem. Just feel free, when you have something that's unusual, complex, feel free to give us a call.
Thank you. Yeah, I think as Vice Chair, Vice President Middleton was just saying to me, the key is communication, just having a regular dialogue and just asking the question whenever you think it even might be worthwhile. Michelle and the rest of the staff, Hillary Rulli and Elena DePietro from the Advice and Opinions Group, do a great job of generally being here for our, general bill responses and responding to legal questions that come up in general hearings and things. I asked Adam specifically to come also because of this, there's a relationship between the city's perspective or the city's role and then also private interests. And Adam is part of the group that, as he mentioned, ends up being in court in appeals. And essentially, we make whatever decision we make, but he's got to go and defend it, even if we're wrong. But in those situations where there is private counsel also representing a private interest, there's kind of like a co-counsel relationship in that we also end up with private lawyers defending our decisions when they're essentially in the interest of their client. And so I've invited a number of land use representatives who some of you have met, or all of you have met some of them, or some of them have met all of you, I don't know. I've asked these four folks in particular to come and share any insight of theirs with us on this issue of how we find facts, how we consider things, and like when we find facts but not in really the best way or the way we should, where they run up against problems when their clients' interests get appealed. And so I just want to hear from them if they have anything to share I'm going to kind of invite you all up. You can fight up to the podium at your own order if you want. Maybe ladies first. Caroline Hecker, Joe Woolman, Al Berry, and Nate Prettle, who commonly represent clients' interests to not only the city council, but also to the zoning board in general. So, hi, Caroline. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for inviting us all to be here today. This is actually really great, and I know I haven't met all of the members of the committee, but it's great to be here. My name is Caroline Hecker. I'm a local attorney with the law firm Rosenberg Martin Greenberg. I represent a lot of local developers in town, and this won't be the last time you see me up at this podium representing some developer with a project in hopefully all of your districts, because hopefully there's development occurring across town. I just want to elaborate on a couple of points that Adam made. We work really closely with the law department, and I think he did an excellent job of explaining the role of this committee when it's sitting in a quasi-judicial capacity. You know, when you're sitting in a quasi-judicial capacity, as Adam said, you have to find these facts. You have to make determinations about what the facts of the matter are, and then you have to apply those facts to the law, to the zoning code, to make your determination. So, Councilwoman Porter, to address the question you raised, you know, what happens when the law department and the applicant or the applicant's attorney have a different view of the way the facts apply to the law? That's the job of the committee, is to resolve that discrepancy, to make the decision, to weigh the two sides and say, you know, I think that, you know, in this case, the applicant is right. In this case, I think the law department is right. Most of the time, we're on the same page, but not always. And so, you know, that's where the tough work of the committee is, in being the arbiter of those decisions. You know, I would say that, you know, from the development community's perspective, what we look for is certainty and predictability. We want to know what the process is going to be. Just tell us what the rules are and we'll follow them. But where it gets challenging for our clients is where there are unexpected curveballs thrown in the process. We get to a hearing and someone asks a question about something that's never come up in any of the discussion we've had about the project, and the hearing gets delayed because we didn't know we needed to be able to address XYZ. So what I would ask, and, you know, reiterate the chairman's position or point that he was making a moment ago about communication, is that to the extent that you have questions about anything that's coming in front of the committee, you can reach out to any of the local private counsel, whether or not we have you know, an applicant who's involved in that matter. Any of us would be happy to talk through the issues with you or help you understand what the, you know, what the underlying, you know, zoning may allow, or what kind of resolutions may be available. You know, I think all of us are open books, and we're happy to help to the extent that we can. So, you know, I think I really appreciate, I will say, the fact that you're going to have a regular docket for land use things. I think it's going to really help us streamline the schedule from the developer's perspective. You know, again, like with certainty and predictability, knowing how long something is going to take start to finish is really helpful. And so to the extent, you know, we know that we can expect committee hearings on the fourth Thursday of the month on our land use bills, that really helps us know how to manage our clients' expectations. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you all have for me. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Mr. Woolman if he has anything to add, if there's anything I missed here. But I look forward to seeing you all again.
The vice chair has a comment.
I just want to, you know, you have, in your office, has been doing work for a very long time with the council, and just want to commend you for sometimes your clients do not give you all the information. They just want to, you know, get something resolved. But your office has learned over the years to really meet with the council person, get our information for things like if there's a zoning issue that they want resolved and they do not reach out to the community first, that can hold back months and months and months of work. So I think that's one important piece that sometimes clients try to overlook, and it just throws off time. But because of your longevity and your team, you understand that, and that has made things a lot easier over the years.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you.
I know Joe's going to come up. I just also want to say, just for kind of context here, I'm really happy that we're hearing from kind of the private sector on this, because I think one of the things that I know that the council president noted before he had to leave, but has talked about extensively, is that we want to grow our city. And that I think this is important. It's part of the mission and values of this council that we grow this city's population and that we make this a place where it's easier for people to move into Baltimore, develop in Baltimore, do the things that are necessary to make population growth possible and to build stronger, more resilient communities, more diverse communities. And so for me, understanding the inside and outside baseball perspective and nuts and bolts of things is really important for that particular, I would say, like vision of growth. And I just wanted to kind of put a point on that for a second. Thanks, Joe.
Thank
Joe.
you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice President. Good to see everybody. I worked with most of you on the committee. There's a couple, including my councilman, Mr. Blanchard, who I've yet to work with, but I look forward to doing so. My name is Joe Woolman. I'm with the law firm of Silverman Thompson. I've been doing land use work here in the city longer than I want to admit, as referenced by my white hair, probably close to 30 years, believe it or not. I also agree with Caroline that Adam did a great job of explaining the legality of all the issues that come before you. And I want to touch on one thing that I completely agree with him on, and that is taking time to carefully consider all the various opinions that may come before you. And to Councilwoman Porter's point, a lot of times those opinions are conflicting. So I think it's important for the committee to recognize that there is a process that includes the planning department, which we really haven't talked about a lot yet. I've known Director Ryer and Mr. Tizo for probably longer than they've wanted to know me. But they're an important part of the process. And even more important than that, and this goes to Madam Vice President's comments, community engagement. I think Caroline and I would both agree that one of the first things we tell our clients is, I understand that you're carrying the cost of this land and that you're taking a lot of risk and making a lot of investment on this project, but the very first thing we tell them is, number one, you reach out to the council person before you reach out to anybody else, because the last thing you all want is a phone call from a community association president or a neighbor asking about a project and you're not aware of it and you haven't been brought into the fold, so to speak. So the very first thing we tell all our clients is reach out to the council person. And frankly, we welcome and need your guidance when it comes to community outreach. It's very important. You know your communities a lot better than our clients certainly may, and that I may, or my colleagues may. So we look forward to getting that direction from you and working with you in that regard. And then we've got to conduct our own community outreach ourselves. We've got to meet with the community groups, meet with the boards of associations initially, and eventually, in some instances, the entire membership of a community association. But we need to work with those community groups throughout this process so we can hopefully get to a point when the matter does come before you at a hearing, that we have at least heard all the concerns. And obviously, and this is something I'm sure you all recognize, you're never gonna make everybody happy. There's always gonna be somebody that's not necessarily happy with the project. So our goal is to try to communicate, and that's something that Caroline mentioned, communication, and Mr. Chairman, you've mentioned it well, communication is key throughout this process. So back to what Adam said about taking time when you're serving in a quasi-judicial role, I think it's important to note that when a rezoning bill, for instance, comes before you, it's not just introduced at first reader and then a hearing is scheduled before the Planning Commission necessarily quickly. There are a lot of times where there is a community outreach process ongoing that is taking some time. And then it's important that during that Planning Commission step of the process that we do our best to develop the findings of fact at that point. And it's important that you hear from the commission and the decisions they make. But I typically tell clients, and don't hold me to this, and I tell them not to hold me to this, but typically I tell them 4 to 8 months for a rezoning bill to go through the process. I mean, it's a significant amount of time, and that goes to Mr. Levine's point about taking time when you're serving in a quasi-judicial capacity. So I think it's important that the committee understands that there is a lot of process, quote unquote, that we go through before we get to your hearing in this committee. And hopefully, if we've done our job, we've at least got the factual questions and issues that come before you to a point where that communication has taken place so that you can render a decision that's fully informed. So I appreciate Mr. Levine being here today and explaining the law. I appreciate my colleagues being here today to weigh in as well. If you have any questions from me, whether they be anecdotally or whatever, I'm happy to answer them. But really appreciate Mr. Chair, you inviting all of us here to participate in this, because I think this whole collaborative effort that you've talked about is very important as we move forward.
Thanks, Joe. Any questions from the committee for Joe? Just, I appreciate the cognizance of time. I hope that when we have kind of routine sort of land use bills coming before us, that we can expediently find facts and vote on these bills to move things along in the process, but never shortchange things where the due consideration should be taken. But to certainly be cognizant of the fact that, like, by the time you get to us, it's been a long time coming already with the, often the community engagement just even before you and your client come to get a bill drafted and working with a council member to have it introduced, and then further community engagement in the time that it takes between that introduction and then to have things scheduled and heard by the Planning Commission, and then hearing it, scheduling it and hearing here once it's been heard by the Planning Commission, and all the public posting and notice and advertising in newspapers and posters and things that have to occur in order for each of these steps of the Planning Commission and our hearing to take place. It's a lot. And so by the time we get it here, if we've got the moment to get it over the goal line, and we can, I want us to do that, but certainly to give consideration where due. Thanks, Joe.
Obviously, I concur.
Al,
Thank you.
Nate, you got anything?
Good morning, everybody. Al Barry, AB Associates. Most of you know me from the planning department role. I started in 1971 with the new zoning code. I think my first day was like the week the new zoning code went into effect. And I was privileged to sort of manage the planning department's land use review for many, many years, certainly with Chris Ryer and now Eric Tizo. I want to talk about a few things that I think are important, just reiterate what the chair had talked about. One, I congratulate the entire committee and certainly the chair for looking at this responsibility, not just reviewing a bill by bill basis, but also being proactive and looking at comprehensive policy changes to grow the city. When I started in the planning department, since then, I think the city's lost over 250,000 people. I think if a city is going to survive, ultimately, we have to find ways to make it grow. And that means more people, more businesses. All of us that are here today represent people that want to invest in Baltimore. And we appreciate working with the council on a case-by-case basis on those projects. But to your point earlier, Mr. Chair, planning, to their credit, when Transform Baltimore was enacted in 2017, said and promised the council that they would look on a somewhat regular basis, it's been either a year or every 18 months, whatever it has been, to realize what changes to the zoning code need to be made because something wasn't working right. Either too many people are asking for individual zoning changes, or people are looking for too many variances, and it's stopping the city from growing. And to their credit, planning, and with your committee's sort of oversight, you're trying to expedite that. And we, as practitioners, I've been working with the Baltimore Development Work Group, I think most of you know, and we were very involved in Transform Baltimore. And a lot of the regulations came about from suggestions, not from us on individual client basis, but on a broad basis, because we could see how something would affect the growth of Baltimore. So we're here to work with your committee either on a basis, informal basis, certainly to policies and that you're going to discuss on your scheduled meetings. We want to know in advance so we can provide substantive comments to that and positive comments to it. We're not always going to agree. Transform Baltimore in many respects was a status quo preservation type document with specific growth areas like transit-oriented development, whatever, certain commercial corridors. And the planning department deserves some credit for trying to strike that balance between a status quo preservation-based zoning code to a growth zoning code. And I hope the committee and the city in general can look at ways to make this a growth process and not a status quo process.
Thanks, Al. Really appreciate that. Any question? Nate, you coming up? You got anything? Cool, because now I'm running over.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Nate Prettle, land use consultant. Been working in Baltimore City for about 15 years. And thank you to Mr. Levine and my colleagues. Not a whole lot to add other than I do want to acknowledge the BMZA's Director Witt here. And I think there's a lot of discussion about the process and how the sort of substantive issues are reviewed by the quasi-judicial boards, in this case, the zoning board, or here, the city council committee, and how these items are sort of considered and memorialized. And in the zoning board, there's been a lot of discussion about, sort of the process recently. This is not a comment on that, but I think they are a great resource in how these issues are reviewed in the public hearing setting and how they're eventually memorialized in the written resolution, which would be, for rezoning bill, findings of fact. And I would encourage the committee to, whether it's use Director Witt or Mr. Levine as a resource, or even just read some zoning board resolutions and see how this process takes place. That's all.
Thanks, Nate. Appreciate it. Cool. I think we covered everything I wanted to cover there. Any comments or questions or anything from the committee? All right. Cool. Then I just want to go on to kind of the committee kind of rules of procedure as our kind of last item of business. Maybe spend 10 minutes on this tops. As the final item on the agenda for today. There's a memo in your packet titled Committee Procedural Rules. We're going to conduct business sort of in three different ways here. A given bill. So if we've got a bill before us, it's a policy matter that requires some hearing and consideration and a vote to adopt new language in the city code in some way. We could have a hearing and vote on it the same day. But we could also have a hearing and then go, okay, some concerns have come up. We're going to need to do a work session on this. And we might come back and have like a session where we just try to work things out. And maybe at the end of the work session, we have some amendments that we're kind of cooking up, but maybe don't have drafted and finalized yet. And maybe we go and we have some private conversations and we figure out everything that we're going to do. And then we're going to come back again and have a voting session. We might have combinations of these, right? We might have a hearing and then just a voting session if we figured out in the hearing a couple of amendments that we want to put forth, and then just come back and vote on the bill and those amendments. But if we need that work session in between, those are the kind of three different ways that we're going to operate here when considering legislation. And I just want to be real clear about how everybody conducts themselves in the hearing. And that's what these rules are about, just so that we're being transparent. I know that in talking a couple days ago with the vice chair, we talked about just setting a clear expectation, not expecting that it's understood that a sponsor should show up for their bill hearing, but actually saying, we're not going to hear bills in here unless the sponsor is showing up to have their bill heard. Like, I'm setting a real clear expectation of that as the chair, and other members of the council are going to know that, because everybody, or a number of members, some far more than others, are going to have zoning bills that come before us, and we don't want those bills to just kind of come in and go pull it through planning commission and get scheduled, and we never hear from the sponsor of that bill. We want the sponsor of those bills here present saying, I am the sponsor of this bill, I would like this passed, and here's what I have to say about it. So, the sponsor of a bill, including committee members, will testify first to present the bill, and we'll ask them to stand before us at the podium here and address us as the committee. I've been to a lot of other legislative bodies, and it's always weird to me to be presenting the bill to my committee to hear it and to vote on it and to consider it from here talking out there. I want the person presenting a bill to stand at this podium and to address us to consider the matter they are bringing before us and to do that initial presentation. If you're a committee member, after making this initial presentation, come and take your seat and participate like a committee member. We will have agency reports brought before us. We will have public testimony before us. And as a committee member, we will ask questions of people testifying or presenting a perspective on behalf of agencies. We will ask questions of people who are testifying from the public or from panels who have been invited. By all means, we want committee members doing that. We will have panelists from time to time. If you've got a bill coming before us, you might say, look, I've got this bill, it's complex, it's important. I'd like to have a panel of 2 or 3 or 4 people present on this, and we can arrange for them in advance to be given kind of priority in presenting the thing kind of alongside you, alongside agency perspectives, things like that. We might ask panelists to stand at the podium, or if we've got room at the desks here, we can ask those panelists to sit there. We can make arrangements for panelists or committee members or whomever to agencies to make presentations on screen here for us. But one thing that I want to be real clear about is that when we get into the hearing of things, we are the committee and the people who are going to ask questions of the agencies and the people who are going to ask questions of the appellants or their representatives, the people who are going to ask questions of the members of the public who are testifying on that is us and only us, the committee. I feel it's a privilege for us to be committee members and that there's a lot of trust and relationship that I'm here to build and instill in committee members. And so I want us to all also be in contact and in communication with our colleagues on the rest of the council so that we can bring their perspective to the table in here as committee members, us. If a non-committee member on the council has a bill to present to us, they can present the bill from the podium just like any of the rest of us, and then we can welcome our colleagues from the rest of the council to have a seat among the agency staff and others at these desks, and we can ask them questions. And so I want to make sure that we know that our colleagues are going to be welcome and invited in here just alongside the rest of our city personnel, but that when it comes to asking the questions, that's our job as committee members. When it comes to voting sessions, so that we can have a real clear understanding of like what is a hearing, what is a work session, and what is a voting session. You know, in a hearing, we're going to hear testimony, we're going to hear reports from city agencies, we're going to hear testimony from the public, we're going to hear presentations from panels and appellants and their representatives. And we might have, you know, back and forth. It's going to be robust. There's going to be like, let's figure this thing out. Let's talk about whatever's coming to mind because it's a hearing. But then we're doing work sessions. We might, you know, we're gonna come at this and saying these are the things that we need to work through. These are the things that came up in the hearing. These are the things that have come up in subsequent private one-on-one meetings and conversations that we've had since the hearing. These are the things, this is gonna be the agenda of things that we need to kind of work through as we go. And so, whereas like generally, we're gonna ask for public testimony in a hearing where we say like, Caroline, come on up and say what you gotta say, but you had your opportunity, thank you. We got other people we gotta hear from. During work sessions, if we're touching on like 6 or 7 or 8 different aspects scattered throughout the 500-page zoning code, Caroline or Joe or Al or any member of the public might have like a little kernel of insight to put on any given one of those. And so we don't want to make them come up and run down their whole list of all of them all at once when we're trying to focus on one thing. So when we're discussing one item in that bill, we're going to say, does anybody have anything that they want to discuss related to this one item? And even if you've had things to add to the discourse on several other items, we're going to ask you to come up and give that on there when it comes to these work sessions. But then when it comes to voting sessions, that's us. That's us making the decision about how we're going to vote on bills. And so by the time we get to a voting session, we all need to understand what the law is that we're working within, what the bill is and the amendments are that are before us, so I can gavel this meeting in and say, committee members, here's an amendment that we want to consider. Is there a second? And is there debate on this amendment? Okay, we're going to take action on this amendment, and we're going to do the business of the committee in voting sessions. The law department can be here to observe, other agencies can be here to observe, but when it comes to a voting session, we need to know our business and just take care of business here, and that's what a voting session is going to be all about. Any questions about any of that? Cool, thank you, thank you, thank you. There's a question of virtual testimony. It was put on individual chairs to come up with policy related to virtual testimony. I reached out to the committee members. I tried to solicit feedback. Should we do virtual testimony? Should we not do virtual testimony? Should there be sign up? Should there not? There's a whole list of rules here that I've laid out for virtual testimony. We're going to ask people to sign up in advance. This is what's done in Annapolis. We're going to limit the number. We don't want an endless number. Look, I want to encourage, here's my motivation. I want to encourage people to come here and engage with us in person wherever possible, but I don't want to preclude the people for whom that is not possible. And so I want to encourage people to sign up. I want to get people to sign up in advance so we also know who's coming. I don't want like 100 people signing up 10 minutes before the bill hearing and for us to have all come in here and had an expectation that like, we're going to hear this bill and it's probably going to take us an hour, but now I've got an hour and a half of additional public testimony because somebody put out an email to like a list of 3,000 people 30 minutes before our bill hearing. Like, I want to create a clear understanding, a clear standard for like, there's a window to sign up for this, and we're also not going to take everybody. We're going to probably also need to solicit, I think we've already asked to solicit a legal opinion about how we curate some online testimony. I'll follow up on that after this separately, but we're not going to have endless online testimony. That's what I'm saying. And we're going to ask people to sign up and give us some information in advance so that we know who is signing up online. Any thoughts, concerns about that? I didn't go into all the details on these rules. Yes, please.
I just want to say I've always granted virtual testimony, so it is, you know, it's manageable. Never deny. That's the key you have to remember. You always give outside an opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. We haven't really seen over the last even couple of years like some huge number of people testifying online. It's been fairly minimal for the most part. Annapolis limits their testimony in different ways. Some of their committees only allow up to 14 people to testify virtually on a given bill. I don't think that we're likely to have even that, you know, that many people wanting to testify on most things. We might get one or two people testifying online or wanting to testify online on a given bill. There's also obvious, like, look, I'm not some like rigid curmudgeon here. I might be a curmudgeon, but not a rigid one.
Only on bike lanes.
Strike this from the record, thank you. The kibitzing. There's plenty of room to grant latitude, you know, and so I'm going to be liberal about this, but the council as a whole adopted a rule that the committee had to adopt actual rules related to this, so I had to, and so I did. I've also made a rule that we can exercise discretion in adhering to the rules or altering the rules as time goes on, so I like that as a rule. And that's the last point there, is that I will exercise discretion reasonably and as necessary, as warranted. Is that cool? Do we have a good, like, working environment here? Are we all, I don't know, kumbaya, but
You got my vote.
what more could I ask for? Convincing, it's okay now. Thank you. Councilman Blanchard, do you have something to say? You give me a look, man.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually do have something to say, and this is the first time I've pressed one of these buttons, so.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
And the red light's on, it's working.
Is this the, where you finished up, it's kind of just a parting thought based off of what some of the land use folks, as well as Mr. Levine had said earlier? Okay, awesome, okay. So just two thoughts. I'll say the first and then say however, and then say point number two. So with the first point, we mentioned these, I think Mr. Chair mentioned the challenges around our population loss. And we have 80 years of lost population in this city. And when you have 80 years of losing population, right, it costs more per person to maintain your water system. And so your water bills go up. And you have fewer students, so you have to close schools. And your transportation system has fewer riders, so your reliability in your transportation services is worse. It is a vicious cycle with your vacant housing problem, right? Like there's so many really bad things that come from this. And so I'm really thankful to be part of a council which is going to be making a committed effort to turning the tide over the population loss over the last 80 years. However, point number two, I've already seen this a good amount since I won my primary election last May, and in a lot of meetings that I've had both with community members and developers and whatnot. To Mr. Levine's point about the zoning system in the city is very complex, and when there's complexity, there's an ambiguity, and to follow on with that, when there's ambiguity, there's, I think, inherently the opportunity for people in positions of influence, such as members of the council, to be in a picking winners and losers situation, which it makes it very difficult to plan things, and it's very detrimental to public trust, and something that I think the council president has astutely recognized as a priority for us is building public trust as a council. So I think that building towards an entire system that I'm very excited to see the thoughts that the previous planning commissioner had given on his way out of having a system that is comprehensive, that is being done fairly and transparently in the public, and is not a matter of property owner A wants a specific thing, and so the council member is put in a position to be an arbiter for property owner A, and so I think I'm very excited to be part of the effort to make this a more holistic process that is factoring in like larger scale the needs of neighborhoods in the city, that both recognizes that we have to grow our population, but also recognizes that having individual elected officials being arbiters of this decisions in a de facto sense is not good for multiple reasons. So I'm very excited to be a part of that.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Councilman Blanchard. Any other parting thoughts here from our agency heads, representatives here, our committee? Staff, anything you want us to know? Cool. I also want to acknowledge my staff member, Sumner Weiss. He's my right hand in legislative and committee affairs, along with, of course, Tony, our committee staff person. If we've got things we got to work out for bills, I want folks to be copying my guy Sumner Weiss here on our communications. I rely on him a lot to do everything that I throw at him all day long. I also want to acknowledge Ethan Hessick from the Council President's Office, who I am really enjoying working with in his role. Really thankful to the Council President for across the board having great staff. Also, my Chief of Staff, Corey Page, back here, has been with me since day one. I always like to tell people, unfortunately, he came to the job half a day late on his first day on the job, but it was because he had to take his last exam at Morgan that morning. So we gave him a pass for the first half of the day. But Corey's been with me since day one, and I rely on these folks, and I'm thankful to have, again, great staff, a great committee here, great public servants to work with, and to finish this hearing in 1 hour and 20 minutes. I'm pretty happy with that. That's a good ratio of overrun based on what I kind of had hoped for. So thanks, everybody. I'm going to use the gavel instead of pounding the table.